Welcome to the Armada EW podcast with your host Tom Withington at the controls. Phase 1 of Russia's war in Ukraine has ended, but battle rages on. Following Mr. Putin's failure to capture Kiev, his attentions focus solely on southern and eastern Ukraine. Russia's application of EW at the start of the conflict seemed underwhelming, but what lessons can we draw so far? Jeffrey Fischer has 30 years' experience with the US military. He has worked as an EW officer and completed 7 combat tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Balkans. His new novel, Balkan Reprisal, will be published in the fall, and he joins us today from Austria. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Jeff, you wrote about Russia's use of EW in late April in an article for the Defense Post. From your perspective, what's gone wrong for them?
You know, that article actually was a bit scathing. There was many analysts, EW guys like myself, as well as news media outlets that were absolutely convinced the first phase of Russia's invasion in Ukraine was going to be EW intensive, cyber intensive, and we didn't see any of that. And we all kind of scratched our heads and couldn't figure out why. And what I espoused that to, or my theory is that Russia's training was lacking. They didn't actually incorporate all their military disciplines together in their training, piecemeal at best. And they were extremely poor at EW, combined arms effort, and probably many of the commanders who thought their inability to communicate or navigate was due to their own jamming and told them to turn it off, which happens a lot in training events. But what's interesting is we've seen a shift. That lack of capability or the poor performance has actually started to shift now, which is interesting.
On the subject of this new phase, is Russia's application of EW changing?
You know, the first phase of operations, even though they're operations, they're still training. So eventually they were going to learn to incorporate it. And they've done that. And they're actually starting to incorporate it quite effectively. There's other theories out there, and I don't say they're right or wrong. Some of my friends argue that it was more of an urban warfare, and EW in an urban warfare environment is really, really hard. Right now, they're out in the open fighting. You can do electronic warfare far easier outside of an urban environment. Also quite possible, but they're getting better at it. And that's very, very clear. You're seeing a lot of GPS jamming in localized areas. You're hearing a lot from Ukrainian soldiers. I recently did another live podcast on a place called Walter Report. And in there, I spoke with actually Ukrainian soldiers who were in the front line who just returned back. And they were telling me that, they couldn't talk and all their networks were being jammed. What I ask listeners to often think about is, we sometimes have to take everything with a grain of salt. There's sometimes radios just don't work. They don't have line of sight. People are on the wrong frequency. There's human error. So I think we need to dig down a little bit deeper on the communication jamming. I'd like to learn more about that. And I'd love to talk to some more Ukrainian soldiers to find out what they're actually hearing on their networks. But clearly, we are getting reports that there's at least GPS jamming. We know that Russia tried to jam the Starlink satellite system. So they're getting active. We know the equipment's there because Western forces or Ukrainian forces have actually captured a fairly advanced electronic warfare system that belonged to Russia. I don't know what the status of that is, but I eventually, I believe it's probably going to end up outside Ukraine in some NATO country that's going to analyze it even further, which would be great for the NATO allies. They'll have a greater understanding of what Russia's true EW capabilities are.
Jeff, do you have any other observations on the use of EW writ large so far in the conflict?
So it's interesting, right? We're seeing YouTube videos out of the battle space, which is a kind of a new thing for me. But you're seeing Russian frogfoots flying around with, duct tape Western commercial GPS handheld systems on their canopies. So they're using Western GPS. They're using Western navigation systems for position timing. And the other thing is they're flying extremely, extremely low, which is also quite interesting because they're willing to, when you fly low like that, you're putting yourself at great risk for anti-aircraft artillery, but you minimize your risk against surface air missile systems. So, that's the calculation right now that the Russian pilots, at least the frogfoot pilots, are taking. I think that the Starlink satellite jamming was quoted by the Undersecretary of Defense or Assistant Secretary of Defense for EW and DOD, and he said it was eye-watering what they could do. And I don't disagree; it wasn't eye-watering, but there's some really, really smart engineers who designed Starlink, and they have some amazing abilities. And I've kind of theorized through, if you were Russia, how would you jam Starlink? And then what exactly did Elon Musk and his Starlink team do to actually counter that jamming? It's a fun mind game to play if you have the time.
What are the major lessons for NATO and allied nations regarding Russian EW?
Rudimentary electronic warfare is really kind of you just try and use brute force. So you're going to try and outpower the transmitter into the victim receiver. And that's where EW started, right? But where a lot of countries have evolved with their electronic warfare capabilities is they've gone to digital. They have digital RF memory, DIRFM. They can listen to an alpha scan or a circular radar that spins around, and they can find backloads and side loads and kind of inject electronic attack into those backloads and side loads a lot better and create false targets in myriad ways, which is fascinating. You don't necessarily, in today's world, if you're very, very good at electronic warfare, you don't have to outpower the victim transmitter into the victim receiver. You just have to be smart with digital kind of smart knowledge energy. Now that we've, that the Ukrainians have captured it, whichever farmer it is, it's now going to make $1 million for selling this thing. That's probably what we're going to look at, right? What was their true capability? Are they truly just relying on power? How clean are their amplifiers? How good are their RF tuners? What kind of antennas do they have on those things? Are they actually gone to phased array? Are they steerable beam? All these types of things will be learned now from those captures.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your insight.
Oh, no, thank you very much for your time. I truly appreciate it. It's a fascinating world that I've been in for about 30 years doing electronic warfare. And it's kind of been behind a black curtain for a long time. And now that it's really good to see that there's people out there that are very interested in becoming popular. It makes my heart happy.
To find out more about Jeff's work, why not visit his website at jeffreyhfischer.com. Don't forget that there's more EW news and analysis at armadainternational.com/electronic-warfare. That's all we've got time for. Thanks for listening.